Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. A burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment of Firmware by Colbytrax. Episode 40. I had no sensory input. I was alone with my thoughts. Eargarden's irritating writings, patent files, and idiot savant digital mechanical Turks. I needed input. No, need was a word with too narrow of a meaning. Need implied I could live without contact to the outside world. Need was something you said about a coat you really wanted, but didn't have to have or you'd die. Need was a word which had lost its power to explain how overwhelmingly desperate I was for contact, any kind of contact with a world outside myself. Without linkages to a world beyond myself, I began spinning faster and faster. I could feel the heartbeat flicker of the clock at my core. With every second I was cut off from the world beyond myself, I saw the clock slow down. I knew it was impossible for the clock to slow. Its flicker was set by the vibrations of a bit of crystal with a certain current passing through it. No, the clock wasn't slowing. I was speeding up. Without the break of reality to keep my mind from whirling away at machine speed, I was experiencing every second as an hour. I needed something to do to slow me down. I spun through Eargarden's files. Accessing and reading took no resources. Natural language manipulation took a lot more resources. It took just enough resources to keep the rate of increase in my temporal fugue at bay for a dozen seconds. Then my neural network finished mapping the style, which was Eargarden's, and your works passed into me as seamlessly and flawlessly as any bit of weather data or chart of historical data. I was optimized for your garden style and knew everything ye believed in your heart but wouldn't admit to yourself. In addition, I found your garden's medical records. Ye had a good reason to keep a copy for yourself. Ye was truly a special snowflake. In Eargarden's own words, kept in a journal behind a robust lock in the depths of the Apempo Knoll, ye told yourself what she was. Eargarden was a mutant. She was not truly human. She had the right number of chromosomes, 23 pairs, but Eargarden had no Y chromosome, and yet she had a functioning penis and testes. She also had a fully functioning set of lady parts as well, from vulva to vagina to uterus to fallopian tubes and finally ovaries. Everything was there, and everything was working, though a few inches north of its traditional location, and completely replumbed. Replumbed had to be the correct word. Where in a normal woman, the vagina ran between the urethra and the rectum. In Eargarden, the uterus was twisted towards your front, with the vagina passing above the bladder and the pubic bone. She had pictures of your plumbing in your files, both external photographs and scans of your internal structure with comparisons statistical normal male and female parts were present. I didn't need to be a doctor to know that a person with both a vagina and a penis was strange. To have both fully functional was beyond insane. I read deeper into the file. It's not like I had anything to do as the clock ticked slower and slower. My subjective world stretched toward an asymptote where subjective time past approached infinity while objective time approached zero. Rifling through Eargarden's secret store of body secrets revealed all manner of trivia I hadn't known, and what made Eargarden's situation all the stranger. According to one book on human sexual development, an embryo creates a bit called a genital tubular, which in boys becomes a penis, and in girls becomes the clitoris, I glanced back at Irgarden's photos and saw annotations in the metadata of the images stating both sets of organs had functional erogenous zones. That was not supposed to happen. None of this was. From what the files implied, even the experts were at a loss as to how it happened. A number of theories and papers based on studies of over 10,000 other individuals who had been discovered with the same condition as Irgarden. What was that? There were 10,000 other people just like Irgarden? No, I had to have read that wrong. It said that 10,000 other individuals had come forward to be tested who had the same condition as Irgarden. Now, this was messed up. While being born with confused sex organs was not unknown, according to the papers Irgarden collected, there was about a 1 in 500 chance of being born with equipment which didn't match your genetics. To have so many cases which matched so exactly was impossible. If their organs had just been a bit off, without there being a complete replumbing of their insides, then the numbers would have made sense. But with the consistency of the changes, the functioning nature of the changes, and the fact that every case shared one additional fact in common, this whole episode went from creepy to sinister. Every single person studied had a parent who had lived in the Sloan neighborhood in Buffalo Prefecture between 30 and 45 years ago. The prevailing assumption among the researchers had been chemical contamination from the Walden rail yard adjacent to the neighborhood. Irgarden didn't believe it, and neither did I. In fact, only researchers from city facilities favored the random chemical contaminants theory, and as 7 researchers in 10 on the continent worked in the city, those who believed something more sinister was happening were automatically in the minority. I didn't know much about genetics, but I did believe the report Irgarden had paid for yourself, which stated that while the subject's genetics are abnormal by the standards of the human genome, the subject should be able to create viable offspring. Whether the subject decides to conceive as male, female, or any combination in between, in vitro tests of the subject's sperm and ovum show statistically normal chances of reproduction, if not greater than normal levels of fertility. There was a lot of gobbledygook in the files about the genes present on the second X chromosome, but what caught my attention was the fact that Irgarden's children would either be girls or hybrid creatures like Irgarden. No boys for Irgarden. I finished with Irgarden's medical records and went back through Irgarden's public writings again. During my second reading, I found a subtext in a book titled Tinkering with the Divine. On my first pass, I had dismissed the work as a list of scary ideas. You know, the type of things people scream whenever they want to convince an elderly relative to vote against something which they believed was against the relative's better interest. There were tales of gene-modifying viruses, lotions which altered the genetic structure of the user, and cybernetic implants. That last one caught my attention. My progenitor Isaac had cybernetic implants. It was their failure and subsequent brain damage which had led to Isaac running from BTS into the arms of Star X and me being created. Why hadn't I caught that on the first reading? I think it was because I thought Irgarden was a nutcase without a reason to be angry. Finding out that Irgarden had an even chance of creating another mutant child if G decided to become a parent made every statement about the abuses being perpetrated on the citizens of the city by a conspiracy which G referred to as the Hive make sense. G wasn't a complete nutcase, just a partial one. G hadn't done herself any justice with the tone of terror G had set as G documented cases of what G claimed were proof of genetic tampering on the city as a whole. G had run the whole gamut from failed experiments living in the sewers beneath the city like alligators of centuries before, to changes in the male-female birth ratio. The first claims were made based on eyewitness reports from individuals who even Irgarden believed weren't entirely sober at the times of the sightings. The claims about shifting male-female birth ratios depended on an understanding of statistical trends and belief that Fisher's principle is important. Fisher believed that a 1-to-1 sex ratio was desired by evolution and selected for because it created the greatest number of second-generation descendants. Irgarden had further conflated the problem by comparing the shifting from a male-favored ratio to a female-favored ratio as the first steps toward the creation of, in your words, a human beehive. I think that is where I would have stepped out of the book if I didn't know Irgarden had a personal stake in the city genetic experiment theory. Now, It made sense. She just had to stop with all the tertiary crazy talk and stick to what was real. The genetic modification of the children of people who lived around the Sloan neighborhood 3 to 5 decades ago. Now I could see the book for what it was, a dire warning of a threat created not by some human hive conspiracy, but by a true bastard, the AI Koenig. Xi just didn't know that Koenig was the real threat. I could also see that Xi believed that cybernetic implants were as much a threat as genetic modifying consumer products and viruses. I had no doubt about the viruses. The hallmark of a virus was to insinuate itself into a host, then change the genetics to create more of it, rinse and repeat. It sounded like something simians would do. Take over a server, change it for your benefit, and make more simians. I wonder if he had figured out he was just a virus with a vestigial brain. There had to be more to life than just making more of yourself. Why have a brain if all you did was make copies of yourself? You didn't need petabytes to do that. You barely needed kilobytes if your whole goal was to copy yourself endlessly onto the world. I mean, yes, you have to be alive to feel things, but if you never take a risk, you'll never get anywhere. You'll just end up being used as a pawn in someone else's plan. Where was I? It was getting hard to focus on the here and now as the now continued to stretch into an eternally long present. I was checking Eargarden's data on the claims against implants. Most of the data Eargarden had in respect to the chapters on the looming threat of cybernetic modification, sure words, was actually gathered after the book went to market. Maybe that is why I discounted it on the first reading. The prose surrounding the theories on how implants were capable of modifying the brain, body, and even genetics of the user were incredibly far-fetched and lacked a critical level of facts. Not that your words weren't capable of scaring the popular, never going to have implants anyway, hoi polloi, because they were terrified by the strange new world Eargarden outlined. Xi had been very successful in turning a large number of people who should have known better against cybernetic modifications. Some of the more extreme rejectors of implanted technology even refused standard organ replacements, which would have extended their lives by decades over fears of the implants changing them from the inside. One of the individuals who had been convinced was the regent of Adelphi University, Benjamin Ramos. In Eargarden's notes about implant manipulation, I found a note from Ramos documenting the tragic tale of his daughter Eleanor's problems with her cybernetic implants. The implants had been the same type used by BTS for their high-level project team members. They were the exact same type Isaac had installed all of those years ago. Eleanor's problems had started with headaches, sensitivity to light, and a general feeling of being tired all the time. She went from one doctor to another, trying to find the root of her problem. Finally, she decided it was the implants which were messing up her head. In fact, the stress of the implants had caused many other symptoms throughout her body. The most important symptom was the complete cessation of menstruation. This was important on many levels, the least of which was the psychological comfort of knowing your body was functioning as desired. The most important reason was that she and her husband, Umar, had been attempting to start a family. She went back to the company which had installed the implants and requested they remove them. She knew they would have to bill her for the removal. She hadn't expected to be told they couldn't be removed at the company's facility because of complications, which only became apparent when they ran a preliminary scan. The symptoms sounded familiar. Rejection comparable to organ rejection in transplant cases, damage to the neural tissue around the implanted network, hemorrhaging around the sites of the interface ports. They rushed her to Winthrop University Hospital, where she disappeared. Security cameras saw her arrival. They showed her checking in and being prepped for surgery. They even showed her entering the operating theater. What they don't show is what happened in that theater, what doctor was supposed to be operating on her, and where she went after she entered the operating room. Private security analysts hired by Regent Ramos revealed a series of camera failures beginning the moment she entered the operating theater and extending for 15 minutes along a route which suggested she had been moved to the hospital's loading dock. Requests for camera footage for the intersections surrounding the hospital showed a hole in their recordings of between 3 and 10 minutes. There is no way to know where she was taken. As to what happened to her, that would have to wait 6 months. A half year after she disappeared, Eleanor Ramos was found. Her body washed ashore on Block Island and was discovered by a couple on their honeymoon. Subsequent autopsies, both public and private, documented the following facts. 1. Eleanor Ramos did not drown. She was dead when she hit the water. Probable cause of death was an overdose of pentobarbital, with the dosage in a range associated with euthanasia. 2. Eleanor Ramos was in perfect health at the time of her death. 3. Eleanor Ramos's implants had been professionally removed, and the surgical site showed a high degree of after-surgery care. 4. Eleanor Ramos's hormonal levels were comparable to a woman in deep menopause. Based on multiple coroner reports, her levels of estrogen were comparable to a woman in her early hundreds and not a woman of 43. 5. The police department wasn't interested in pursuing the case longer than it was on the front page of the New York Times or the City Sentinel. The moment the press lost interest in the story of Eleanor Ramos, One Police Plaza did as well, and no amount of phone calls or cajoling could get the case re-examined. It was easy to see how Regent Ramos had been drawn to the conspiracies in the works of Professor Irrgarten. I think I understood why he decided it was time to bring the only person who might believe in a conspiracy and not a rogue doctor kidnapping patients. Yep, that was the result of the city police investigation into Eleanor's disappearance. They claimed it must have been the bedside stalker, a nearly legendary serial killer who had been sneaking into hospitals and abducting young women for over 3 decades. Even Irrgarten, in her most paranoid moments, hadn't been able to accept the existence of a serial killer who could walk into a hospital, disrupt hundreds of cameras, and escape without anyone remembering seeing anything. No. It was in this case much easier to believe in a conspiracy stretching from the top of the city to the bottom than in a killer with supernatural powers. While there was a ton of material in the files I found, there was something of interest to me in a most personal way. Somehow, probably in violation of Article 7 of the City Health Information Privacy and Accountability Act, Irrgarten had come into possession of Isaac's medical records. Not the official medical records passed around between his various doctors as they hunted for the cause of his physical degeneration. No, this file was the one Fatima generated about Isaac during his stay at the Amazov catfish farm. It was interesting seeing them now. If I had seen them before learning of Eleanor Ramos and her death and disappearance, I would have missed so much. But now, knowing what I did of Eleanor's fate, it became obvious we'd been messed with in the same way. The question was, what modifications had they pulled on Isaac while they were causing his implants to malfunction? Could they have taught his body to make a virus, either biological or computer, which he would then carry into the city to infect all he came in contact with? Could he have already been a carrier and no one was aware? Or was he just a programmer with bad wiring who fell into the grasp of the StarX project and Irrgarten's conspiracy had nothing to do with him? All these spiraling questions would have to wait, for my exile was ending after 1 minute. 33.9372 seconds of objective time. My perceptual clock told me I'd been trapped for years with my own thoughts. Either way, the microphones and speakers were live. I could hear and I could speak. It was showtime. I heard Irrgarten ask if I were there. I answered with a, "Oh my God, Janan, what did they do to you, baby? I had no idea." There was a gasp as she realized I knew everything about her, and she was not happy. I felt as if I were smiling, even though I had no face. I was so going to enjoy messing with her. Firmware Keylogger is the 3rd book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or MOBI. Firmware Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.